The fluorescent lights in the law office cast harsh shadows across the mahogany conference table, making everything feel sterile and cold. Sarah Martinez sat rigidly in the uncomfortable leather chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap to stop them from trembling. Across from her, Marcus, her soon-to-be ex-husband, leaned back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who had already won. "Just sign here, Sarah." Marcus's attorney, a sharp-suited woman named Patricia Kellerman, slid the divorce papers across the polished surface. Her tone was professional but carried an undertone of impatience, as if Sarah's hesitation was an inconvenience to everyone present. Sarah's own lawyer, a public defender named Tom Chen who she could barely afford, gave her a sympathetic nod. They both knew she had no choice. 10 years of marriage, and Marcus had systematically maneuvered every asset into his name alone. The house in suburban Denver with its perfect white picket fence, gone. The BMW she'd loved driving through the Colorado mountains, gone. Even her grandmother's antique jewelry, somehow lost during their separation, gone. The settlement is generous, considering, Patricia continued, her manicured fingers tapping against her tablet. Mr. Martinez is offering spousal support for 18 months. That should give you adequate time to establish yourself independently. Generous. Sarah almost laughed at the word. 18 months of barely enough money to rent a studio apartment, while Marcus kept their $2.3 million house, his successful consulting firm, and everything else they'd built together. She glanced at Marcus, studying the face she'd once loved. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his expensive suit immaculate. He looked like he was attending a business meeting, not dissolving a decade-long marriage. "You know this is fair, Sarah," Marcus said, his voice carrying that patronizing tone she'd grown to hate. "You never contributed financially to our partnership. I built the business, I made the investments, I earned everything we have." The words hit her like physical blows. Never contributed financially. As if the years she'd spent managing their household, entertaining his clients, supporting his career, aspirations, and sacrificing her own dreams meant nothing. As if love could be measured solely in dollar signs. Sarah's sister, Elena, had warned her about Marcus from the beginning. "He's charming," Elena had said during their engagement party, "but watch how he talks about money. It's like it's the only thing that matters to him." Sarah had dismissed the concern then, blinded by love and Marcus's grand gestures, expensive dinners, surprise weekend trips, the perfect proposal at sunset on Lookout Mountain. Now, sitting in this sterile office with the afternoon Denver sun, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Sarah realized Elena had been right. She thought about her sister's words from last week. "Don't let him see you break, Sarah. Men like Marcus feed on broken women." Tom Chen leaned over and whispered, "Sarah, I know this is difficult, but fighting this will only cost you more money you don't have. He's covered every angle. Every angle." Marcus was nothing if not thorough. He'd started moving assets 2 years ago, she now realized. The joint bank account had been quietly emptied and closed. The investment portfolio she'd thought they owned, together, had somehow become his sole property. Even the small savings account she'd maintained from her part-time work at the local art gallery had been claimed as marital assets and absorbed into his estate. Sarah picked up the expensive pen Patricia had provided and stared at the signature line. Her maiden name felt foreign in her mind. Sarah Elizabeth Connor. She'd been Sarah Martinez for so long that going back felt like erasing a decade of her identity. "Take your time," Marcus said, but his tone suggested otherwise. He checked his own Rolex, another asset she wouldn't see a penny from. "I have a client meeting at 4. Of course he did. Business never stopped for Marcus Martinez. She remembered their first anniversary when he'd taken a conference call during their romantic dinner at the Brown Palace Hotel. She should have seen the signs then. The way he valued deals over moments, profit over people. The pen felt heavy in her hand as she signed her name with deliberate care. Sarah Elizabeth Connor. The woman she used to be, before Marcus convinced her she needed him to be complete. "Excellent," Patricia said, gathering the papers with practiced efficiency. "The decree will be finalized within 30 days. Mr. Martinez, your assistant has the wire transfer information for the spousal support payments." Marcus stood up, straightening his tie. For a moment, Sarah thought he might say something. An apology. An acknowledgement of what they'd once meant to each other. Anything to suggest the past 10 years hadn't been a complete waste. Instead, he simply nodded to his attorney and walked toward the door. "Marcus," Sarah called out, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. He turned back, one eyebrow raised in mild curiosity. "I hope it was worth it," she said quietly. "I hope having everything was worth losing everything." Something flickered across his face, annoyance, maybe, or guilt. But it passed quickly, replaced by that familiar mask of indifference. "Goodbye, Sarah. Good luck with your fresh start." The door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. Tom Chen packed up his modest briefcase while Patricia typed notes into her tablet, both lawyers already moving on to their next cases. Sarah sat alone for a moment, staring at the copy of the divorce papers in front of her. The afternoon sun had shifted, no longer warming the conference room. She felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside her and left only an empty shell. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "How did it go? Want to grab dinner and wine? Lots of wine?" Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. At least she wasn't completely alone. She had her sister, she had her health, and she had something Marcus didn't know about, her pride. He might have taken everything material, but he hadn't broken her spirit. Not completely. Standing up on shaky legs, Sarah gathered her purse and walked out of the law office into the crisp October air of downtown Denver. The city bustled around her, business people hurrying to late meetings, tourists exploring Lodo, students from the nearby university laughing as they walked past. Life continued, indifferent to her personal catastrophe. She pulled out her phone and called Elena. "Hey, sis. Yeah, it's done. And yes, I definitely need that wine." She paused, looking up at the towering buildings around her. "Actually, make it a bottle, or two." As she walked toward her sister's apartment, her temporary home until she could figure out her next move, Sarah's mind wandered to practical concerns. She'd need to find a full-time job, probably something entry-level since she'd been out of the professional workforce for so long. The 18 months of spousal support would barely cover basic living expenses in Denver's expensive housing market. But there was something else nagging at the back of her mind, a fragment of memory she couldn't quite place. Something about an account she'd opened years ago, back when she still believed in their partnership. The memory was fuzzy, buried under years of Marcus's financial control and her own growing dependence on his decisions. Sarah shook her head, dismissing the thought. Marcus had been thorough. His attorney had made that clear. Every asset, every account, every investment had been accounted for and transferred to his name. She was walking away with nothing but her clothes and her determination to rebuild. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Winter was coming to Colorado, and Sarah would face it alone for the first time in a decade. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, she felt something unexpected stirring in her chest. Not hope, exactly, but possibility. Marcus thought he'd won completely, but Sarah was beginning to realize that sometimes losing everything was just another way of becoming free. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Sarah sat in her cramped studio apartment in Capitol Hill, surrounded by cardboard boxes that contained the remnants of her former life. The space was a far cry from the spacious house she'd called home for 8 years, but the $800 a month rent was all she could afford on her current budget. She'd found work at a local coffee shop called Cosmic Grounds, pulling espresso shots and serving overpriced lattes to Denver's hip crowd. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was something. And the manager, a tattooed woman named Riley who was roughly Sarah's age, had been understanding about her situation. Divorce is like a death, Riley had said during Sarah's interview, except the person who died is still walking around, making your life complicated. The October evening light filtered through the single window of Sarah's apartment, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. She'd been putting off this task for weeks, going through the personal items Marcus had generously allowed her to take from their home. Most of it was junk. Old magazines, college textbooks, a few pieces of furniture he'd deemed worthless. Sarah pulled out a shoebox filled with greeting cards and photographs. Their wedding photos made her stomach clench. She looked so young, so hopeful in her white dress, gazing at Marcus like he held the secrets to the universe. He'd been different then. Or maybe she'd been different, more willing to see only what she wanted to see. Under the wedding photos, she found pictures from their early years together. There was one from their trip to Rocky Mountain National Park, both of them grinning at the camera with Long's Peak in the background. Another showed them at her college. Graduation. Marcus's arm around her shoulders as she held her diploma in art history, the degree she'd never really used. God, we were babies, she murmured to herself, setting the photos aside. At the bottom of the shoebox, her fingers found something unexpected, a small leather portfolio she'd forgotten existed. Inside were important documents she'd apparently stored away years ago: her birth certificate, social security card, college transcripts, and something else. Sarah's breath caught as she unfolded a piece of paper she hadn't seen in at least 5 years. It was a statement from First National Bank of Colorado, dated March 2019, for a joint investment account in both her and Marcus's names. The account number was partially obscured by a coffee stain, but she could make out most of it. The memory came flooding back suddenly and completely. She'd opened this account during their 5th year of marriage, when she'd still been working part-time at the gallery and had managed to save $3,000 from her small commissions. Marcus had been impressed by her initiative and suggested they open a joint investment account to grow their future together. "This is smart, babe," he'd said at the bank that day, his hand warm on her shoulder. "We'll add to it whenever we can. Think of it as our emergency fund." But life had gotten complicated after that. Marcus's business had started taking off, requiring more of his attention and more of her support. She'd gradually stopped contributing to the account, and eventually, she'd forgotten about it entirely. Marcus had taken over all their financial, planning, consolidating accounts, and streamlining their investments. Sarah stared at the bank statement, her heart racing. The account had shown a balance of $3,247 as of the statement date, but that was over 5 years ago. Had Marcus closed it? Had he forgotten about it too? She grabbed her laptop, an ancient Dell that barely functioned, and navigated to First National's website. Her hands shook as she tried to log into their online banking system, using every password combination she could remember from their marriage. After 20 minutes of failed attempts, she realized she'd need to call the bank, directly or visit in person, but it was after 6 p.m. on a Friday, so she'd have to wait until Monday. The weekend stretched ahead of her like an eternity. Saturday morning found Sarah at Elena's house in the Highlands neighborhood, helping her sister prepare for her daughter's 8th birthday party. Elena's home was everything Sarah's apartment wasn't: warm, spacious, filled with family photos and children's artwork. Her brother-in-law Jake was grilling burgers in the backyard while 8-year-old Mia ran around with her friends. "You look like you haven't slept," Elena observed, handing Sarah a cup of coffee that was infinitely better than anything she served at Cosmic Grounds. "I found something," Sarah said quietly, pulling the bank statement from her purse. "I think Marcus might have missed something in the divorce." Elena's eyes widened as she read the document. "Holy shit, Sarah. Do you think it's still active?" "I don't know. I'm going to the bank on Monday to find out." Sarah glanced around to make sure Mia wasn't within earshot. "It might be nothing. He probably closed it years ago. Or, Elena said, lowering her voice. Mr. Perfect made his first mistake. The possibility was almost too much to hope for. Sarah had spent the past month accepting that she'd been completely outmaneuvered, that Marcus's superior business acumen had left her with nothing. The idea that he might have overlooked something, especially something in both their names, felt almost like a fantasy. Even if the account is still open, Sarah said, it probably doesn't have much in it. $3,000 5 years ago may be a little growth if it was invested well. $3,000 is $3,000 more than you had yesterday, Elena pointed out. And if it's been invested this whole time? She trailed off, both sisters thinking about the bull market of the past few years. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of speculation and forced normalcy. Sarah helped with Mia's party, played board games with the family, and tried to act like her entire future didn't potentially hinge on a forgotten bank account. Monday morning, Sarah called in sick to work, something she could barely afford to do, and arrived at First National Bank when the doors opened at 9 a.m. The branch was the same one where she and Marcus had opened the account years ago, though the interior had been renovated since then. I need to check on an old account, she told the customer service representative, a young man named Derek, who looked like he'd just graduated college. I think I might still have access to it, but I haven't checked in years. Derek pulled up the account information on his computer, his expression remaining professionally neutral. I'll need to see 2 forms of ID, and I'll need to verify some information with you. Sarah's hands trembled as she handed over her driver's license and a utility bill. Derek typed for what felt like an eternity, occasionally glancing up at her, with an unreadable expression. Ma'am, he said finally, I'm going to need to get my manager. Would you mind waiting just a moment? Sarah's heart sank. They were going to tell her the account had been closed, that she'd gotten her hopes up for nothing. She sat in the uncomfortable chair beside Derek's desk, watching other customers conduct their business with the easy confidence of people whose financial lives weren't falling apart. A woman in her 50s approached, extending her hand with a professional smile. Ms. Connor? I'm Janet Morrison, the branch manager. I understand you're inquiring about account ending in 4127? Yes, Sarah managed. It's a joint account I opened with my ex-husband years ago. I'm not sure if it's still active. Janet's expression was carefully controlled. The account is indeed still active. However, there are some unusual circumstances I need to discuss with you. Could we speak privately in my office? Sarah followed Janet to a glass-walled office overlooking the main banking floor. Her mind raced with possibilities. Maybe there were legal complications because of the divorce. Maybe Marcus had tried to close the account but couldn't without her signature. Ms. Connor, Janet began, settling behind her desk. I want to be very clear about something. This account has been actively managed by an investment advisor for the past several years. The original deposit has grown considerably. Grown how much? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Janet turned her computer screen toward Sarah. The account balance displayed made Sarah's vision blur for a moment. $247,000. I don't understand, Sarah said, gripping the arms of her chair. That can't be right. The account was set up with automatic investment in a diversified portfolio, Janet explained. It's been performing very well, especially over the past 3 years. The technology sector investments in particular have seen exceptional growth. Sarah stared at the number on the screen. Nearly $250,000, in an account Marcus had either forgotten about or assumed was worthless, in an account that still legally belonged to both of them. What does this mean? She asked. In terms of access? Well, Janet said carefully, since you're listed as a joint account holder, you have full access to these funds. However, I should mention that your ex-husband has never accessed this account. The last time anyone inquired about it was when you opened it in 2019. Sarah's mind reeled. Marcus, in all his meticulous planning and asset grabbing, had completely forgotten about the small investment account his wife had opened during happier times. the account that had quietly grown into a fortune while he focused on bigger, more obvious assets. "I need to think about this," Sarah said, standing up unsteadily. "Can you print me a current statement?" "Of course," Janet said, already clicking her mouse. "And Ms. Connor? You might want to consider speaking with a financial advisor. With this amount of money, there are tax implications and investment strategies you should consider." Walking out of the bank with the statement in her shaking hands, Sarah felt like she was in a dream. The Denver morning was crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that made the city feel full of possibility. For the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to smile, really smile. Marcus had been so focused on the big picture that he'd missed the tiny detail that would change everything. The account she'd opened with hope and dreams had grown into something that could give her not just survival, but genuine independence. Her phone rang as she walked back to her car. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and for a wild moment, she wondered if he somehow knew what she'd just discovered. Then she realized it was probably just some paperwork detail from the divorce. She let it go to voicemail. Sarah didn't return Marcus's call. Instead, she drove straight to Elena's house, the bank statement burning like a secret in her purse. Her sister was working from home that day, managing social media accounts for several local businesses from her converted garage office. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Elena said when she opened the front door. "Good ghost or bad ghost? $247,000, Sarah said quietly. Elena stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her inside and closed the door. "Say that again." "The account I told you about? It's worth almost $250,000. Sarah sank onto Elena's couch, finally allowing the enormity of it to hit her. Marcus forgot about it completely. Elena let out a whoop that probably woke the neighbors. "Holy shit, Sarah. Do you know what this means?" "It means I'm not broke," Sarah said, laughing for the first time in months. "It means I have options." They spent the next hour on Elena's laptop, researching financial advisors and tax implications. The money had grown through a combination of good timing and aggressive growth investments, exactly the kind of portfolio Marcus would have chosen if he'd remembered the account existed. The beautiful irony, Elena pointed out, is that his own investment strategy made you rich. But as the initial euphoria wore off, Sarah began to think more strategically. She could simply withdraw the money, disappear, and start over somewhere else. Or she could do something more creative. "I want him to know," she said suddenly. "I want Marcus to understand exactly what he overlooked." Elena raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like the beginning of a revenge plot." "Maybe it is." Sarah's phone buzzed with another call from Marcus. This time she answered. "Sarah, thank God." Marcus's voice was tight with stress, an emotion she'd rarely heard from him. "I need to ask you something about the divorce paperwork." "What about it? Did Chen mention anything about outstanding accounts? Patricia's asking about some banking discrepancies in our final asset division." Sarah's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Probably nothing," Marcus said quickly. "Just some old paperwork that doesn't add up. Listen, are you free for coffee this afternoon? I'd rather discuss this in person." "I'm working," Sarah lied. "What's this really about, Marcus?" There was a pause. "My accountant found references to an old investment account in some tax documents from 2019. It's probably been closed for years, but Patricia wants to make sure we didn't miss anything in the settlement." Bingo. Marcus's accountant had found the paper trail, and now he was panicking that he'd made a mistake. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. "I don't remember any investment account from 2019, she said, which was technically true. She hadn't remembered it until 3 days ago. "Yeah, that's what I figured. It was probably something small I closed years ago. But you know how lawyers are. They want every I dotted and T crossed." "Right," Sarah said. "Well, I need to get back to work." "Sarah, wait." Marcus's voice took on that familiar tone he used when he wanted something. "How are you doing? Really?" The question caught her off guard. For a moment, she almost believed he actually cared. Then she remembered sitting in that law office 3 weeks ago, watching him check his Rolex while she signed away her life. "I'm surviving," she said coldly. "Thanks for asking." After hanging up, Sarah felt energized in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Marcus was worried, actually worried, and he had no idea that his worst fears were already reality. Over the next few days, Sarah developed her plan. She would let Marcus discover the account on his own, let him realize the magnitude of his mistake, and then she would make her move. But first, she needed to secure her position. She met with a financial advisor recommended by Janet at the bank, a sharp woman named Carol Martinez, no relation to Marcus, thankfully, who specialized in helping clients protect and grow their assets. "The first thing we need to do," Carol explained, "is make sure this money is legally protected. Since the account predates your divorce and was never mentioned in the proceedings, it remains joint property. However, if your ex-husband discovers it and tries to claim it, things could get complicated. What do you recommend? We transfer the majority of the funds to accounts in your name only, keeping a small balance in the original account. That way, if questions arise, you can honestly say the account exists, but has minimal value." Sarah liked Carol's thinking. Within 48 hours, she had moved $200,000 into new investment accounts while leaving $47,000 in the original joint account. Still, a substantial sum, but not the fortune it had been. Meanwhile, Marcus's calls became more frequent and more desperate. He left voicemails asking about old paperwork and missing documentation. Sarah could hear the stress in his voice growing with each message. Finally, she decided to take pity on him. "Marcus," she said when she called him back, "you sound stressed. What's going on?" "Sarah, I need to ask you directly. Do you remember opening an investment account at First National back in 2019? "Vaguely," she said. "I think I put some money from my gallery job into something." "Why?" "How much money?" "I don't know. A few $1,000s, maybe?" "Marcus, what is this about?" There was a long pause. "Sarah, that account is still open. It's worth nearly $50,000. Sarah had to admire his partial honesty. He'd obviously discovered the account but was lowballing the amount, probably hoping she wouldn't check for herself. $50,000, she said, injecting just the right amount of surprise into her voice. "That seems like a lot." "It is a lot. Look, legally, since we're both on the account, we should split it, $25,000 each. I can have Patricia draw up an agreement." "That's very generous of you," Sarah said sweetly, "considering you fought so hard to make sure I got nothing in the divorce." "Sarah, that's not—" "I'll think about it," she interrupted. $25,000 is a lot of money for someone who's pulling espresso shots for minimum wage. "You're working at a coffee shop?" For the first time, Marcus sounded genuinely surprised. "Cosmic Grounds in Capitol Hill. You should stop by sometime. I make an excellent cortado." That evening, Elena came over with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine to celebrate. They spread the food across Sarah's tiny kitchen table and toasted, to Marcus's growing panic. "So what's the endgame here?" Elena asked. "You've got him right where you want him." Sarah twirled lo mein around her chopsticks, considering. "I want him to understand what it feels like to lose everything," she said finally. "I want him to know that his arrogance cost him more than he ever imagined. And then I disappear. New city, new life, new identity if necessary. But first, I want to watch him realize exactly how badly he screwed up." The next morning, Sarah walked into the First National branch and requested to speak with Janet Morrison. The manager greeted her warmly and escorted her to the same office, where Sarah had learned about her windfall a week earlier. I need to close the joint account, Sarah said without preamble. And I need to make sure my ex-husband understands exactly what he's lost. Janet raised an eyebrow. That sounds like it has a story behind it. Oh, it does, Sarah said, smiling. And it's about to have a very satisfying ending. She spent an hour with Janet, arranging for the account closure and transfer of the remaining funds. But more importantly, she arranged for Marcus to receive official notification of the closure, along with a complete transaction history, showing the account's peak value of $247,000 just days earlier. He'll receive this notification tomorrow, Janet confirmed, along with a statement showing the account's complete investment history. Sarah imagined Marcus opening that envelope, seeing the numbers, realizing that the small account he'd forgotten about had grown into a fortune that was now completely beyond his reach. There's one more thing, Sarah said. I'd like to make a donation. She wrote a check for $25,000 to the Denver Women's Shelter, the organization that had provided her with legal resources during the divorce. The donation was in both her and Marcus's names, ensuring he'd receive a tax document acknowledging the charitable contribution he'd never authorized. Walking out of the bank for the last time, Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. Marcus would spend the next few days, possibly weeks, trying to figure out how to recover money that no longer existed. He'd call lawyers, accountants, and probably the bank itself, only to learn that Sarah had legally and completely outmaneuvered him. Her phone rang as she reached her car. Marcus again. This time she was ready to answer. Sarah, we need to talk, now. Marcus's voice was strained, barely controlled. She could picture him in his pristine office, tie loosened, hair disheveled for the first time in years. Hello to you too, Marcus. How's your day going? Cut the shit. Sarah, I know what you did. Sarah settled into her car, genuinely enjoying this conversation for the first time in months. I'm afraid you'll have to be more specific. I've done quite a few things lately. I learned to use an espresso machine. I furnished my apartment with secondhand furniture. The account, Sarah. The fucking account. Language, Marcus. That's not very professional. She could hear him taking deep breaths, trying to regain his composure. Sarah, please. Let's be adults about this. We can work something out. Like we worked something out during the divorce? That was different. That was business. And this isn't? The silence stretched between them. Sarah pulled down her visor and checked her reflection in the mirror. She looked different somehow. Younger. More alive. The constant tension she'd carried for months had melted away, replaced by something she'd almost forgotten. Confidence. How much is left? Marcus asked finally. Left where? Don't play games with me, Sarah. I know you transferred the money. How much is left in the original account? Nothing, she said simply. I closed it yesterday. Another long silence. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah, that money. Some of it was from my business investments. Money I earned. Actually, Marcus, if you check the records, you'll see that the initial deposit came from my gallery, commissions. Everything else was just compound growth, market gains. Funny how money grows when you forget about it, isn't it? This isn't over. Actually, it is. Completely and totally over. You made sure of that in the divorce, remember? No shared assets. No ongoing financial entanglements. Your words, I believe, were clean break. I'll sue you. I'll take you back to court. For what? Taking money from an account with my name on it? Good luck with that. Sarah started her car, listening to the engine purr. Besides, Marcus, you're forgetting something important. What? You'd have to admit to Patricia Kellerman, and to a judge, that you forgot about a $250,000 asset during divorce proceedings. How do you think that would affect your reputation? Your business? She could practically hear him deflating. Marcus's entire identity was built on being the smartest person in the room, the man who thought of every angle. The idea of publicly admitting such a massive oversight would be devastating to his ego. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Nothing from you, Marcus. I already have everything I need." "Sarah, please. We were together for 10 years. That has to count for something." "You're right. It does count for something." Sarah's voice grew cold. "It counts for exactly nothing, because that's what you left me with. Nothing. No house, no car, no savings, no career, no dignity. Nothing. I gave you spousal support. 18 months of barely enough money to survive while you kept millions. Don't talk to me about generosity." Sarah ended the call and turned off her phone. She had one more stop to make before she could truly put this chapter of her life behind her. Cosmic Grounds was busy with the afternoon coffee rush when Sarah walked in. Riley looked up from the espresso machine with surprise. "I thought you were sick today." "I was," Sarah said. "But I'm feeling much better now. Actually, I need to talk to you about something." They found a quiet corner booth after the rush died down. Riley listened intently as Sarah explained her situation, carefully edited to focus on her unexpected windfall and decision to relocate. "So you're rich now?" Riley asked, grinning. "That's fucking awesome. Your ex-husband sounds like a complete tool." "He has his moments," Sarah said diplomatically. "But the point is, I can afford to make some changes, starting with this job." "You're quitting." "I'm quitting. But first, I want to do something." Sarah had thought about this carefully. The coffee shop had been her lifeline during the darkest period of her life, and Riley had been more than just a boss. She'd been a friend when Sarah desperately needed one. "I want to invest in the shop," Sarah said. "Riley, you've talked about expanding, maybe opening a second location. What if you had a silent partner?" Riley's eyes widened. "Sarah, that's incredibly generous, but I can't let you—" "You're not letting me do anything. This is business. I believe in what you're building here, and I have money to invest. Think of it as my way of making sure other women have the kind of opportunity you gave me." They spent the next hour discussing numbers and possibilities. Sarah offered to invest $50,000 in exchange for a 25% stake in the business, enough to fund Riley's expansion plans while giving Sarah a steady income stream and tax advantages. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers," Sarah said as they shook. "Hands on the deal." "Your lawyer?" "I'm upgrading from Tom Chen," Sarah laughed. "Turns out good legal advice is worth paying for." That evening, Sarah sat in her studio apartment one last time, surrounded by boxes she was preparing to put in storage. She'd decided to take Elena's advice and travel for a while. Maybe Europe, maybe the Pacific Northwest, maybe somewhere she'd never been. She had the luxury of time now, the freedom to figure out what she actually wanted to do with her life. Her new phone, she'd upgraded that too, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. I'll find a way to get my money back." Sarah screenshot the message and forwarded it to her new attorney along with a note. "FYI, in case we need a restraining order." Then she blocked Marcus's number permanently. Elena knocked on her door an hour later, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing a huge grin. "I brought supplies for a proper celebration," she announced, "and I have news." "Good news or bad news?" "Hilarious news. Jake ran into Marcus at the grocery store this afternoon. Apparently our boy is not handling recent developments well." Elena popped the champagne cork and poured 2 glasses. According to Jake, Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in days. Unshaven, wrinkled clothes, the whole 9 yards. He kept muttering about that bitch and stupid mistakes. "Charming as always," Sarah said, accepting her glass. "But here's the best part," Elena continued. "Jake overheard him on the phone with someone, probably his lawyer, saying he was going to make this right and get back what's mine. He can try. My attorney says there's no legal avenue for him to recover money from an account I legally owned. Even better, Jake says the word around town is that Marcus's business is struggling. Apparently, some of his clients have been questioning his judgment lately. Something about poor attention to detail affecting his professional reputation. Sarah felt a flicker of satisfaction. She hadn't intended to damage Marcus's business, but if his own oversight was coming back to haunt him professionally, it seemed like poetic justice. "You know what the funniest part is?" Sarah said, sipping her champagne. "He's so focused on the money I took from him that he doesn't even realize what he actually lost." "What do you mean?" "He lost me, Elena. For 10 years, I managed his social life, his household, his client relationships. I was his unpaid personal assistant, therapist, and social coordinator. I made him look good at parties, remembered his clients' wives' names, organized his life so he could focus on making money." Sarah set down her glass and looked around the small apartment that had become her sanctuary. "He threw all of that away for what? To keep a few $1,000,000 he already had?" Elena raised her glass. "To Marcus's loss and your freedom. To new beginnings," Sarah corrected, clinking her glass against her sister's. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in the Denver International Airport, boarding pass in hand. She'd sold most of her furniture, put her remaining belongings in storage, and bought a one-way ticket to Portland. She'd always wanted to see the Pacific Northwest, and now she had the time and money to explore. Her phone buzzed with a final text from Riley. "First day of expansion construction. Thank you for believing in us. Safe travels, boss lady." Sarah smiled and tucked the phone away. The coffee shop investment was already paying dividends, not just financially, but emotionally. She'd created something positive from the wreckage of her marriage, something that would help other people pursue their dreams. As she settled into her first-class seat, another small luxury she could now afford, Sarah reflected on the past month. Marcus had tried everything: legal threats, emotional manipulation, even showing up at Elena's house demanding to speak with her. But Sarah had stood firm, protected by excellent legal advice and the simple truth that she'd done nothing wrong. The last she'd heard, through Elena's network of Denver gossip, Marcus had been forced to take out a significant loan to cover some business expenses. Apparently, losing track of $250,000 had created some cash flow issues right when several major clients had decided to take their business elsewhere. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 1247 to Portland," the pilot announced. "We're expecting smooth skies and a beautiful view of the Rocky Mountains as we depart Denver this evening." Sarah looked out the window at the city that had been her home for a decade. The lights sparkled like jewels against the darkness, and she could see the distant glow of the mountains she'd hiked with Marcus during happier times. But she felt no sadness, no regret. Denver would always be part of her story, but it was no longer her entire story. As the plane lifted off and banked west toward her new adventure, Sarah opened the book she'd bought for the flight, a guide to starting over after major life changes. The first chapter was titled The Art of Letting Go. She was already an expert at that. 6 months later, Sarah was living in a charming Victorian house in Portland's Hawthorne district, working as a freelance art consultant and building a new life one careful choice at a time. She'd reconnected with her love of art, started taking photography classes, and even begun dating a kind, funny man named David, who taught environmental science at Portland State University. The coffee shop investment had grown into 3 locations, with Riley expanding throughout Colorado. Sarah's other investments were performing well, managed by a team of financial advisors who treated her money with the respect it deserved. She still got updates about Marcus through Elena. His business had recovered somewhat, but his reputation had taken a permanent hit. Word had gotten around Denver's business community about his oversight during the divorce proceedings, and potential clients were wary of hiring a financial consultant who'd lost track of his own assets. More importantly, Marcus had been forced to confront the reality that money couldn't solve every problem. You couldn't buy back trust, respect, or love. You couldn't purchase a do-over for the choices that had cost you everything that really mattered. Sarah's phone rang as she was walking through Washington Park, camera in hand, capturing the spring blooms for a client's art installation. Elena's name appeared on the screen. "Hey sis, how's the Pacific Northwest treating you?" "Like a queen," Sarah laughed. "I just landed a contract with a major hotel chain to curate art for their properties. Real money, creative fulfillment, the whole package." "That's amazing. Speaking of amazing developments, I have some news from the Denver front." "Oh?" "Marcus got remarried." Sarah stopped walking, surprised by her own reaction. She felt nothing. No anger, no jealousy, no satisfaction. Just a mild curiosity about a stranger's life choices. "Good for him," she said, and meant it. "I hope she knows what she's getting into." Apparently, she's some young marketing executive he met at a business conference. Elena 2.0, if you know what I mean. "Elena, that's not fair. She's probably a lovely person who has no idea she's marrying a man who values spreadsheets more than people." "You're being awfully generous." "I'm being free," Sarah corrected. "Free from anger, free from bitterness, free from caring about Marcus, Martinez and his choices. It's incredibly liberating." And it was true. Standing in the park with cherry blossoms falling around her like snow, Sarah realized that her revenge had been complete, not because she'd taken Marcus's money, but because she'd reclaimed her own life. The forgotten investment account had been the key that unlocked her prison. But she'd been the one who'd chosen to walk through the door. "Sarah?" Elena's voice brought her back to the present. "Yeah?" "I'm proud of you. You know that, right? You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into the best thing. Thanks, sis. That means everything." After ending the call, Sarah continued her walk through the park. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago. Broken, defeated, convinced her life was over at 32. That woman could never have imagined the life she was living now. Independent, creative, financially secure, and genuinely happy. Marcus had taken everything from her in the divorce. But in doing so, he'd given her something invaluable, the motivation to build something entirely her own. Her success wasn't borrowed or inherited or shared. It was earned through courage, intelligence, and the kind of determination that only comes from having nothing left to lose. The forgotten account had been the spark, but Sarah had built the fire herself. As the sun set over Portland's skyline, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sarah smiled and raised her camera to capture the moment. Tomorrow she would start work on a new project, continue building her new life, keep moving, forward into a future that belonged entirely to her. Marcus could keep his millions, his new wife, and his diminished reputation. Sarah had something much more valuable: freedom, self-respect, and the knowledge that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. The tiny detail he'd forgotten hadn't just cost him money, it had cost him the chance to break her completely. And, in the end, that oversight had been the best gift he'd ever given her. Sarah tucked her phone away and headed home, ready to start the next chapter of her story. This time, she would be writing it herself.